Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be analyzing and reacting to a track, or a soundtrack to be specific, coming out from that movie that nobody asked for, Tron Ares. And the track in question is As Alive As You Need Me To Be by the one and only Nine Inch Nails. And from what I have heard, the only good redeeming factor about that movie is, well, the soundtrack. So today we're going to be analyzing one of the tracks from it. And to be very frank, I wasn't expecting much, not because of Nine Inch Nails, but due to the fact that this is trying, or at least is following the steps from Daft Punk, and how much or how close are they to matching the same level of finesse or synergy, that's a better word, that Daft Punk managed to create with the previous Tron movie. Don't know. Why? Not because these guys are lesser band than Daft Punk. It's because the style is way too different. And in my opinion, Tron feels way better at home with Daft Punk than with Nine Inch Nails. But we're not going to be analyzing it from that perspective, because the plan for this is to see how well and how good the sound of the mix is. So let's do it. Here we go. But before we go, if this is your first time at the channel, I welcome you, because in here we analyze the music that we love from the perspective of an active musician, a professional music producer, but using language that everybody can understand in a way to expand our knowledge when it comes to music production, songwriting, and of course, music appreciation. With that being said, let's rock and roll. Here we go. So here we go, As Alive As You Need Me To Be by Nine Inch Nails.
Makes me feel infection. It's almost like a tongue on the back of my neck. I never had a choice, connection. I never had a chance to catch my breath. It's eating up the space between us. It's eating up all remaining doubt. It's filling up the hole inside you. It's trying to find a way to let itself out. Give me something to believe in. All these hands have got a hold on me. Give me something to believe in. As alive as you need me to be.
Okay, sorry for interrupting, but you know the drill. First and foremost, this song is loud. The mixing process makes it super loud and impressive sounding in the way that it feels like it's slamming you in the face, don't you think? Super loud. Is that a good or bad thing? Well, it depends. Some people have an adverse reaction to this loudness thing, because it has an effect on music that we'll be discussing later on. In my opinion right now, I think the sound of the mix is very good. It sounds correctly, it's as loud as it should be because of the style of the music. It's actually expecting the music to be that punchy, right? Kind of in your face. Now, I tried to draw your attention at the beginning of the track to how interesting the use of the stereo field, which is the spread between the two speakers or the pair of headphones you're rocking, since we're dealing with a stereo mix, by the way, was used at the beginning, because the introduction, the sequence played by the synthesizer, something like the stuff that I got behind me, was panned mostly to the left, making the introduction of the drums and the impactful moment in which the bass kicked in at the beginning felt much more punchier sounding than it actually was. Why? Because we got blasted by the entirety of the arrangement together, coming from both ends of the spectrum, of the stereo spectrum. First, we only got sound from the left, and then when everything kicked in, everything was coming at us from all sorts of directions, making it feel much more intense. Very clever trick, I gotta admit. That was a very good move. Now, the arrangement is quite interesting because there are plenty of synthesizers. The track is purely made, well, for the exception of some electric guitars that were part of the arrangement later on. Most of it is produced by the sound of synthesizers, which I happen to be a huge fan of. I think it shows I have a few of them in my collection. And they are fantastic for the very fact that you are actually creating sounds that have never heard before by any human being. Every time you start to twist knobs on one of these bad boys, the chances for you to find something completely different and unique and actually never been heard before are super high because the flexibility and the capabilities of a synthesizer as a tool for music production are basically limitless. The thing is that they are mostly associated with cliche uses and cheesiness, especially if you come from a much more rock and roll background. But Nine Inch Nails being kind of this industrial band and having this weird mix between electronic music and rock music fusion, I think they make a great use for them. Now, I love, and that's something that actually it took me by surprise. The low end of this song is incredibly punchy, super present in the mix. I will be discussing that with you in a much more deeper detail a little bit later on this analysis. But just for you to know, it truly slaps. Super punchy. I even listened to this track in a small HomePod, the tiny one, and even in that guy, the low end was very well represented. Of course, here in the studio, well, I got a proper system, and I even have a subwoofer right now connected to the system, and I can hear it at its fullest, and it's super controlled. I gotta admit, it's super well crafted. From the beginning, I can tell you that this is an incredibly produced track, and actually, the mix is also insane. We're gonna be discussing that and nerding out a little bit more for down the line. For now, I want you to pay attention to the sound of the vocals as well. They did a few tricks while the track was playing, because the introduction of the vocals, they were dry sounding. What does that mean for those of you who are not into the terminology? When you're discussing the sound of music, or if I put it in different terminology, if you're discussing the sound of music while it's being produced, the term wet or dry kicks in, or it's been thrown around quite often. Why? It stands for the amount of effects being applied to a given signal. Okay, and at the beginning, you got the sound of the voice super dry and in the center. And it was super loud. It sticks out like a sore thumb, but it's not in a bad way. It's part of the aesthetics of the sound, of the music. But the sound of the voice is super dry. There were no effects whatsoever, or then a little bit of distortion, making it even drier sounding. But this is what happens. As we got closer and closer to the chorus, the first modulation of the track, from a harmonic perspective, you started to see how they introduced a little bit of reverb, which is this sound, reverb. And as you can tell, it adds this sense of ambience to the sound of my voice. So they were adding it little by little, and I can even see somebody working with the console, pushing the fader in, used to add a little bit more of that sound. And then they applied delay to the sound of his vocals, but just at the end of certain phrases. And delay is this, delay. Okay, repetitions. But you could hear it beautifully and super clearly at the end of the final phrase of the first chorus. They even had this kind of repetition, totally not a nod to Pink Floyd's Dogs, one of my favorite tracks by Pink Floyd, by the way, in which they actually do something very similar to that. Maybe the fanboy in me is trying to tell me that it was a reference to Pink Floyd, but who knows? But whatever, it worked in the mix. So let's keep rocking, but I want you to pay attention to how the integration between the different elements of the mix, because we're dealing with super heavy and extremely loud sounding kick drums, intense and aggressive sounding synthesizers playing these repetitive notes, which is known as an arpeggiator, it's a sequence, and see how well they interact with the low end of the music, the bass, which is not necessarily a bass, it's probably another synthesizer. So pay attention to those, and then I will discuss that with you once we analyze the mix as a whole. Here we go. Let's continue listening to it.
Always gonna go this way. There's no
So you got it. Super aggressive sounding, right? That's something that sticks out to me quite a lot. Now let's discuss the mix. And also, did you manage to understand what I was trying to draw your attention to? The whole thing with the interaction between the instruments, because there are plenty of things happening at the same time. Particularly in this final section, you saw plenty of special effects being thrown around across the stereo spectrum. I was trying to draw your attention to that as well. And somehow, well, not somehow, this is proper crafting of music. Uh, None of the instruments are clashing with each other. All of them are there, fitting correctly, and adding something of value to the sound of the music we're listening to, in the sense of creating some form of emotional impact on us as listeners. That's difficult to do, especially when you're dealing with something as dense as this, because it has plenty of character, and also the sounds that you're working with, the synthesizers being so aggressive, they occupy a lot of space in the in mind that we're dealing with a house. Okay, music is the work going through it. When it is kind of when there's stuff getting in the way of the water coming out, you might get it clogged and it won't flow correctly. When mixing, when you have some massive sounding instruments, such as is the case of this track, in which the synthesizers are incredibly big, not only loud but also aggressive, they occupy a lot of space. And through the art and craft that is actually working with the studio environment, you can find ways for all of those instruments to fit in together in a way that is not only coherent but also musical. And in this case, this song is actually a masterclass on this. This was and is a tricky mix to work with due to the nature of the sounds. And the fact that it sounds like this is remarkable. This is something coming from someone who does this for a living. So maybe it's me being biased and being just geeking out. But now let's take a look at the screen, because it's time to talk about the mix as a whole. Over here we got what is known as the frequency range analyzer, which is telling us how loud each of the different frequencies that are part of the human hearing range were at their highest point in volume. 20, which is the lowest you can hear, all the way down to 20,000 hertz. Okay? And as I said before, the mix is loud, but also the low end is insane. See this gigantic push over here. This is incredibly loud. I know it might not mean that much to you, but tell me about this. When you were rocking, when I was blasting this track and we were analyzing it together, don't tell me that the sound of the bass wasn't impressive, super to the forefront, super impactful, super energetic, and yet is not rumbling. That's incredible. Once again, we can see it here. Here is where the magic is happening. This area here, this is something between, allegedly it's 40 hertz. And this bump is where the core of the sub energy, this is not sub sounding bad, you might get what I'm trying to say. The super low end energy is what is the most, is the loudest, is the one that is being projected to us the most. Why? Because of this is where the fundamentals, the most important aspect of the most important frequency that is part of the sound of the bass and the kick drum in this particular mix could be found. And by enhancing those, you can create this incredible amount of energy pushed through the headphones or your speakers, because you are actually exciting the right frequencies of that particular area of your mix. I hope that makes sense. I think I went a little bit too nerdy, but whatever. We're talking about Nine Inch Nails. Of course, these guys know what they're doing. So you see that we get this slope slowly but surely taking us to what is the mid-range. And this is very, very cool to see. The mid-range is kind of even. Even the high mids are super even, not necessarily that loud, but you have this incredible jump on the low end, while the high end, which is normally reacting in this way, this is where you find some of the harshness and the abrasive sounds or abrasive texture of the sound that you're listening to. But this is the cool part. Here is where the aggression of the synthesizer is found, a good chunk of it, but also this section here. That's where you got these bumps. This is where a good chunk of the and the sections, that's where you get the gnarliness, the attack, the bite of those sounds. super well done, because this is very easy for someone who is not necessarily a seasoned mixer. You will find or feel the need of pushing this area over here to enhance the aggression of the sounds. But if you do it, or if I put it differently, if you overdo it, you're gonna make the sound of the mix feel harsh and unbearable and kind of annoying to listen to. This is done to perfection. Incredible. Also, the mid-range, well, the rest over here is where this is probably Trent's voice, or this section, this spikes, because his voice is kind of in the baritone register, so he's not necessarily a singer with a huge range. But what he does it very well. And he has the aggression, and he has the personality, and also keeps the song feeling nine-inch naily. So very good. And the synthesizers, I was expecting these to be a little bit more of a scooped shape, due to the fact that the synths are kind of spaced out. It's very dense, as I keep saying, but they had plenty of openings for some of the elements to shine. For example, the vocals. The sections in which he was singing, he was most of the time being the only element in the center of the mix. I don't know, super nerdy, but I hope you're getting it, okay? Because I know you're intelligent. Now, let's take a look at the second section of the analyzer. This is the dynamic range analyzer, and this is where we're going to have that discussion regarding loudness. This blue blob represents the loudness of the track throughout time. The higher this blue blob goes, the louder the track was at that very point in time. The interaction between the high point in volume with the lowest point in volume in any given mix is what we consider to be dynamic range. And dynamic range stands for those interactions. Why? When something is quiet, it's much more interesting, it's much more intimate, and kind of closer to you. When something is louder, it's bombastic, it's intense, it's dynamic. But in between the two of us, of those two, while the track is playing, you create this interaction. And that interaction is what adds a sense of emotion, intensity to music. That's why it's very important. And when everything is loud, basically speaking, you're removing the quiet parts out of the mix, destroying the dynamic range. Now, this mix is loud. Let's see how loud it was. This introduction, clearly we can see the ta-ka-ta-tan at the beginning of the track. And here's where everything kicked in. This is the ramp up, and this is the voice. I told you the vocals are super loud. But see how loud the entire mix becomes. This is insane. The jump in volume is staggering. And once this is over, you can listen to the track again and pay attention to how loud it jumps. It's simply ridiculously loud when everything kicks in. And see how little difference you got from the chorus to the introduction to the verse. This is the second half of the verse. Sorry, the verse. And then we got this dip because this is the pre-chorus. And this is the massive sounding chorus. See how loud it goes. Ridiculous. But it is thanks to the dynamic range that the track can have this extra push whenever it needs it. I was kind of concerned with this track before doing this exercise with you, because I felt that it was way too squashed. Squashed is a term that is used to refer to the compression applied to a master mix, which is the output coming out of the mixing process. During mastering, and that compression, in super simplified terms, you get a signal going up and down, and through the compression, you will set a particular threshold. That means that the sound of the signal won't go louder than this. But why would you do that? By doing this, you are able to push the quieter parts closer to that threshold, giving a much more perceived loudness, feel to the music. It's always done. It's super important. It's part of every mix. The concern or the controversy surrounding it is the overuse of it. There are moments in which it's welcomed. There are moments in which it is not. And in this case, this mix totally deserves it. Why? The style, the context, the instrumentation, the aesthetics, all of those come at play. And in this case, we're dealing with a mix or a song that requires this kind of balls to the wall, in your face, full with attitude kind of sound that is very, very much enhanced by making everything loud. But still, we got dynamic range. The thing is that see how loud the chorus is. It's ridiculous. Let's take a look at the second half of the track. And there, super loud, super loud. But you'll see, this is the ending. This is the very end of the second chorus. And see this incredibly long, but super loud ramp up. This is a crescendo in musical terms. And what they're doing is adding more instrumentations after the big drop. Adding more instrumentation after the big drop, while the track increased in intensity through the use of volume. This is a good example of the importance of having a dynamic range. The song ends with this kind of super intense and that thing, right? It is thanks to this. Because it is due to this slope that we get to this point in which tension is so massive that as soon as it's taken out of the song ends, you feel that, damn, something's about to begin, right? That's the whole point of dynamic range. So even though we're dealing with a super loud mix, you get a good example of why it is so important. So there you got it. Those are my opinions regarding this track. I won't care for the movie because from what I have seen, it sucks monkey balls, so I'm not gonna bother and I'm not gonna waste my time. But the soundtrack seems to be very good. I've been rocking these guys' soundtrack for a while, and I'm enjoying it. I can tell you that it's a very good sounding Nine Inch Nails record, but without watching the movie, I don't know how well it fits in the context of the movie. So if you happen to be one of those adventurous souls that dare to watch the movie at the cinema, please let me know what you think about it, and if the soundtrack at least matches with the action taking place in the scenes. Okay? So with that being said, thanks for joining, thank you for watching. As every single time I remind you, I gotta remind you that you should never let anybody tell you what to dream about. Subscribe, leave a comment, leave a like, and remember that I will see you when I see you.